Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais in Ontario, Canada, with episode number 131 of The Yakking Show. This is the show for awakening you to new perspectives for surviving in the very changing world we find ourselves in right at the moment. As always, we have a lineup of interesting guests for you. Today's will be no exception, but I don't want to steal Kathleen's thunder. So my first job is to introduce my co-host, Kathleen from Waterloo, Canada. And I have to tell you that Kathleen is the person to go to. She can help you with all your IT development needs. So welcome, Kathleen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you for that intro. And thank you all so very much for tuning in to our show. We so appreciate you and we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And if anyone out there is interested in being a guest on our show, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Peter or myself. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another very special guest with us today. It will be a very interesting show. His name is Shane Pokroy. Shane, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, you are the host of the Underground Antics podcast. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your background and what led you to start your own podcasting show?
Sure. Well, as you know, podcasting is one of the best formats around. I really enjoy, I'm a big fan of podcasts myself, and I have been for a number of years, well before I started the podcast myself. And what I really like about it is the long form style, like the conversation style, like this podcast is as well. Mine is the same. And, what I enjoy about it is that you're not getting like a 2 or 5 or 7 minute interview like you would normally on a TV show with, an interesting person. You get to really sit and go deep into a number of different topics and really figure out who the person is and what their story is or what their expertise lies in. And so, the podcast format really opens up that ability to have. And so for me, how I got started in it was, I don't know, it must have been probably 2 or 3 years ago. I started like playing with the idea of like, oh, I could do a podcast. Like, I have always been able to just talk to people, anyone that I meet. I guess I'm lucky that way. I mean, it's funny. I wouldn't sort of call myself an extrovert except when I want to be. I do tend to spend most of my time by myself, just chilling or doing whatever. But I really do enjoy talking to people and hearing stories and learning new things and, getting to share that with other people as well is a great opportunity. And so at some point I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. Like now's the time. And at first I actually started with just doing solo episodes. So it was just me monologuing for a bit. And that was fun, but it was quite difficult because I didn't have like an area of expertise or passion that I could go on and on about. So after about 3 episodes of that, I kind of like took a break and I needed to like refocus. And then sometime after that, I was like, I'm going to do the interview style, right? Have the conversations with people. And so I started doing that about 6 months ago or something like that. And I've loved it. I mean, I've spoken to some really amazing people. My show, I think, much like yours, has less of a niche market per se, where, we talk to people across the board with varying interests or expertise or stories or whatever it is. It's like, oh, this is an interesting person. I want to talk to them, right? And hear what they have to say and let them share their wisdom with the world as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I've loved it ever since. No episodes have been bad, luckily, so far, fingers crossed, But yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at, and I couldn't be happier, and I feel truly lucky and blessed to be in this position.
Wonderful.
Great. Well, I listened to one of your episodes and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to get back and listen to more. Like always, time. We meet so many interesting people ourselves just to listen to all of them. There's not enough hours in the day. But anyway, we will get there. So yeah. For our viewers who've picked up on the similarity of our accents, like me, you spent a lot of time, most of your life, in fact, in South Africa, and you've been here for a number of years, obviously. But have you found living in Canada a big adjustment?
I mean, yes and no. So I was born in South Africa. So were my parents and grandparents. They originally came from Lithuania. So I'm part of the like sort of smallish Jewish community that lived in South Africa for a while. I think there were about 60,000 at one point, which is sizable in itself. But I guess, you know, in a population of like 50 or 60 million, you're like a tiny blip, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But nevertheless, so I was born there and I went to school there and I did everything. And I moved to Canada with my family when I was about 19 or so. And it was mostly to get away from South Africa, you know, with the current situation it's been like this for a long time, but it's evolving and, you know, the place is getting more and more dangerous and, you know, there's crime everywhere and everyone suffers from it, you know, myself and my family included. And, you know, I mean, people get killed for their watch or for their car or for their whatever it is. And it was just not a great place to start a future. And my parents knew that I have a younger sister. So my parents knew that she and I would leave as soon as we could anyway. And so they had made the decision that they wanted to also come along with us, right? So that we could sort of live our lives together somewhere else. And that's what like a lot of people are doing. You know, there's a big exodus and it's getting more and more widespread, particularly for like younger people, I think, who have that opportunity to leave. You know, I think once you're like well established in a place and you have a business or you're working and a family and your whole world is there, as you get older, it becomes more and more difficult to uproot.
Sure.
Not that people don't do it. I mean, my grandparents emigrated to retire in Israel, you know, some 15 years ago. And so it's obviously, you know, lots of people do it, but it can be tricky. But so we came to Canada and I studied here and worked here. And it's been a big adjustment in terms of the lifestyle, you know, and well, the weather, of course. You know, in South Africa, it doesn't snow, and here it snows like like 8 months of the year. It's cold. I mean, we don't get that much snow for 8 months, but it's cold a lot of the time.
Right.
So that was for sure an adjustment. But you take up things like winter sports and various activities to keep busy, and you know, humans are remarkably adaptable to new things. And so, you know, just without having like the attitude of like this always sucks and it doesn't get better and whatever, if you just kind of accept it and be like, okay, well, how can I make the most of this situation? That's really what made the difference, right? To be able to say like, okay, well, you know, I have to sort of sacrifice the weather of South Africa, but you come to Canada and there's all these amazing things that this society has. That's the sort of positive that you get from it, as of course you guys know, living here, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And no one's trying to kill you when you're living here.
All right.
Well, not very often, and unless you say really bad things on someone's podcast, of course.
Yeah.
I've just for the sake. Sorry, Kathleen, you've got to tell me to keep my mouth shut if you. Just for our audience, I just want to tell our audience that when Shane is talking about many people leaving South Africa, this has been going on for 20, 30 years. And it's not only white people. I mean, if one is to go to England, the hospitals are full of South African and Zimbabwean nurses, just one area of employment in England. Many of people of other races have also left, those that could. Some, you know, many, of course, don't have the opportunity. So it's not purely a white exodus, it's a brain drain as much as anything, I think. Am I correct in that, Shane?
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends on, as you say, like the person or the people and whether they can leave or not, right? Because it's not just dangerous for white people, although, I mean, I don't have stats on hand, but they tend to be the target of a lot of the crime, but not exclusively.
Not at all.
Actually, now that so just for, you know, for anyone listening, like the racial ratio statistics in South Africa are quite interesting, right? So with a population of about 60 million-ish now, I think, it's about like 50 million black, which you can divide into all different groups, but from a racial perspective, it's that. And then there's about 2 million white people of either Dutch or English descent. You know, South Africa was colonized by the Dutch in the 1600s and then by the English in the 1800s, hence why we speak English. And then there's, you know, like the colored race, which is technically like a mixed race, but in South Africa, that's how they self-define as colored, and they have their own culture and community and, you know, all great people. And, you know, the hard thing is about a country that is sort of descending like South Africa tends to be, is that most people are obviously good and nice and well-meaning and just, you know, wonderful people. And the culture there is phenomenal. I mean, it's really a special place, and I would highly encourage anyone to go there when traveling, and you get to go to the safaris, and it's such an amazing place, and food and all that kind of stuff. But to live there is a different story. And politically, you know, over the last 20 years or so, there have been increases in like anti-white programs. I don't know what the right word is to use it. And, you know, not to be critical of government or whatever, it's like before then there was the apartheid, which was a real oppressive regime, you know, of the white nationalists oppressing, you know, the entire black population. And that was terrible, right? Like torture and brutal and really rough stuff. And then Mandela sort of liberated that with his crew in 94. And so, you know, it's this balance of political power game.
Sure.
And, you know, we're seeing it in many countries in the world. And so from that perspective, what happens is when the government sort of, at least this is my experience of it as a non-political expert, as the government sort of started to try and reboot the country, and, you know, they wanted to empower those who have been underprivileged and suffered in history, that's all good, right? That sounds like the right thing to do. And they started doing that. But things sort of took a turn here and there with like extreme high levels of corruption and greed and, you know, just things that really destabilized all of it, right? And so
That's right.
a huge amount of the money, taxpayer money, whatever, wasn't going towards rebuilding society. It was trying to transfer power in a lot of places in ways
and transfer wealth as well. That was
absolutely
the problem. Yeah, no, and that's one of the reasons why I left several years before you. I could see that writing on the wall, and I was 50ish when I left South Africa, but when I came to Canada, I was in my mid-50s, and so I know what you're talking about and how it's more difficult, in many ways, more difficult to re-establish oneself, but at least in your 50s, normally you don't have young children to worry about in a new country. So there's pros and cons for all that. So I know Kathleen wanted to ask you something about philosophy.
Sure.
So before I get into more trouble, let me hand the reins back to Kathleen.
So Shane, you studied philosophy and psychology in university, but you're also fascinated by sciences and technology and spirituality. How did one lead to the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. So both of my parents are psychologists, so that's where that comes from. And so that side of things has always been a part of my life. And my sister is now qualifying as a social worker as well. And so I've always had that fascination. And I've always been a very curious person, right? Like even as a kid, I would ask all kinds of questions about everything, and I just wanted to know, right? And as I got older, I kind of realized that I was looking for a kind of answer that, you know, science couldn't really provide, right? It was that kind of like deeper level spiritual yearning, I guess you could say, or your soul questions or whatever it is. And they tended to manifest more in the sense of like, you know, you first start off being like, well, I want to know all about humans and human nature. And that then you study that, hoping to kind of like find yourself in that. and that didn't really work. So then I moved on to the philosophy side of things, which I loved because it was all these big questions. And then the problem with that was that, well, philosophy doesn't really give you any answers, right? For the most part, it gives you options to choose from because you have all these great thinkers giving very logical arguments for big questions. Does God exist? What's the meaning of life? That kind of stuff. But you'll have multiple camps giving contradictory answers that you look at and you're like, oh, well, they're all right, but they can't all be right because they contradict each other. Either God is this or God is that or God is the other thing. And they're sort of relatively mutually exclusive. And so although it's an interesting and important discipline in itself, it didn't really give me any more answers that I was looking for. And then finally, I happened upon a book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, who is I would consider my official online guru. And I say online because I've never met him. I mean, I wish I would, but for the moment, I just listen to his stuff and read his books. And that was the first time when I really got that taste of like, oh, there's more to life than knowledge and answers in that realm, right? And the spiritual, I don't know, path or whatever you want to call it is basically exploring what's beyond just what we know and can talk about. And it's at a much deeper level. And those were the kind of answers that I was looking for, although they're not really answers as such. They're more like ways of being in life, right? So that's kind of how I got to where I am. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Going back to your podcast, or going forward onto your podcast now, you mentioned that you don't have a particular niche and you like to interview interesting people. Is there a particular type or range of interesting people you like to interview, and how do you go about finding them?
Yeah. So when it started, I was kind of like doing anyone that I could get, right? Just to sort of get some traction, develop the skill of conversation and interviewing people. It's not, I guess people who don't do it might not know, but like it's a real skill to be able to have a conversation with people and extract the best from them, right? And
Absolutely.
have them be at ease and comfortable and willing to share and open up in that capacity, particularly for people who are not naturally just speakers and can speak endlessly. To be able to get them to really give you information is a skill. And so I wanted to practice that. And so I kind of started just with my own network of like, who do I know, or who do I know who knows people? But now I'm at a point where I'm like, oh, well, I want to talk to like people that are the most interesting, because from the feedback that I've gotten from listeners, it's like the best episodes are the ones where I'm the most invested in it, right? And I have the most interest, and that somehow communicates through the show. And so for everyone's sake, it's better to find those that are, like real top notch, which I've been blessed to be able to find. And so, I like to talk to scientists about stuff. Though that's always interesting, whether it's scientists or doctors or researchers. Neuroscience is a big area that I love. I love to talk to so-called spiritual people, teachers, speakers, authors, that kind of stuff, because that lines up with what I like to talk about. I also like to talk to people with good stories. They don't, doesn't have to be any expertise, just like someone who's gone through something crazy or many crazy things. And like, that's always fascinating to me. Even like aliens, like I've had some people come on to talk about that kind of stuff, which is so cool. And so, yeah, and I find them, there's multiple channels. Sometimes people reach out to me. Sometimes I reach out to people, and I find them, through the various social media tools that you can use to find guests for podcasts, but also just like Googling stuff and finding who's the top people in the field that are, somewhat media personalities that would be willing to do shows, right? Because not everyone is.
No, we know that. And just for any aspiring podcasters out there, there's a good resource called matchmaker.fm that I think we both use, and they're quite good at finding guests and finding platforms if you want to be a guest. Before Kathleen gets in with her question, a very quick one, and you only needs a short answer. You mentioned your grandparents moved from Lithuania, one of the Baltic states, right? And I know things in the Second World War in those three states there were very hairy. Have you been to Lithuania at all?
I have not, no.
You haven't? Okay.
And actually, it was my great-grandparents that moved,
great-grandparents.
so
okay.
I have no real connection other than just that bloodline.
No, I've met a few people.
What about you?
I haven't been there myself, but I know people from those states, some of their grandparents would have had similar experiences to your great-grandparents. And I was just intrigued with your interest in philosophy and psychology. I was wondering if you had been to those, because apparently Estonia and I think Lithuania have a very high percentage of skilled people and are very high up in tech and IT and all this sort of thing. Anyway, that was just an aside. I was interested. Maybe you'll get there one day.
Yeah,
Kathleen,
hopefully.
over to you.
Oh, just getting back to your podcast, Shane, what do you see the future for your podcasts, and where do you hope it will lead you to?
So the truth is I'm not sure. I mean, I have some dreams about where it would go and what it would mean, but currently I'm in the position where I'm open to see where it goes, right? And what opportunities come from it, because I'm sure, as you've also experienced, is like you get to meet people that you wouldn't have otherwise met.
That's true.
And opportunities pop up just out of nowhere, right? That you wouldn't have entertained before then. And so I don't know where it's going to go, but that's quite exciting. My dream, I don't have a dream for it to be like the top podcast in the world or whatever it is. I'm like, that's fine. For me, it's not so much about like the fame or the recognition or any of that kind of stuff. Like, why I love doing the podcast is that I can do what I love, which is talk to people and learn and share with the world. And also, like bring some positivity and some good stuff to people. And then to be able to do that and make money is just, it's like a dream come true. And so if I can sustain that and just build it slowly, then that's what I want for it.
Oh, that's great. Great. Similar to us, we started on a whim in March last year for two reasons. There was so much doom and gloom in the first stages of the Great Shutdown, and we wanted to bring a little bit of light into people's lives. And secondly, we were in contact from our other businesses. We were in contact with a number of small business operators, particularly in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, who were really struggling with being shut down. And we wanted to give them some exposure. And that's why we started off with that. And we branched into authors. And the third reason was we had so much fun. And we thought, well, we'll try it for a couple of episodes. And we've had so much fun. We're now on 131, and we'll keep going. So that was similar to you.
And Peter,
that's amazing.
You now have an international audience.
Oh, absolutely. You're number 3, I think, from South Africa, or with South African connections. Interviewed a couple, one from Port Elizabeth, one from Cape Town, India, UK, other countries in Europe, a lot from the USA. Yeah,
amazing.
And audience all over, even Philippines. We have some audience in the Philippines. Yeah,
that's cool. Shout out to them.
Yeah, for sure. They probably want to try and listen to people who speak English a funny way like me. I don't know, but anyway. Of course, it makes it interesting when you're all over the world. Like people in Australia are just getting up as we're about to go to bed, so you've got to be a bit careful with your timings. So that's fun. What I wanted to ask you, with your background in philosophy and psychology, how can mindfulness and spirituality help people in this really unsettled period we find ourselves in? And there's lots of concern about the future. It doesn't matter whether you agree with everything that's being done for the virus, or like me, you're a bit of a maverick and think there's a bit of nonsense going on. Whichever, there's a lot of uncertainty ahead, whichever way we look at it. So how can those things help people?
Well, from my experience, meditation has transformed my life, right? And meditation comes in many forms, and it's really about what works for you as an individual. And so whether you want to do short meditations, long meditations, guided meditations, just listening to music, going for a walk, going for a run, doing anything really that just lets your mind quieten, right? Or at least focus your attention on something, right? Like one part of meditation is the attention training to focus on a particular thing. So it could be a mantra or an object or something like that, or a tree. And another part of it is then letting your attention just focus on itself, which is a sort of different kind of bit. But however you do it, I mean, even if you do it for 2 minutes a day, right, you immediately notice the benefits of it, because it really just relaxes your whole nervous system, right? And it's particularly important, I would say, in these times where things are so uncertain and there's a lot of emotion running high, and fear and anxiety and depression, all really mean things that a lot of people are experiencing. Now, it's not that this will cure those things, obviously, but what it does is it just allows you to just feel the like good aliveness of life in that moment. And you can even do it just by simply taking a deep breath in. You can be mid-conversation, and if you're just aware of that breath as it comes in and goes out, that's a meditation, if you want to call it that way. And it just derails the mind for long enough to be able to sort of ground you and recenter. And so, yeah, my recommendation would be to do what works best for you. And if you don't know what that is, try a few things, see what it's like. And, go in without expectations that it's going to be miraculous or, have some major spiritual experience. It's like, no, that's not, I mean, it might happen and that would be great, but really just take a moment to just be present, right? And that's sort of what it comes down to for me. And that you just do it, frequently, and like anything, it gets better with time.
Thanks, Shane.
Yeah.
Kathleen?
So this probably is in part an answer to this particular question, but maybe there's more to it. What would you encourage people to do in order to become more enlightened? Meditation is probably one thing that they can do, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah. Well, it's hard for me to speak about like other people in general, because we're so multi-varied and we manifest in a variety of different ways. But I can speak for me and what's worked for me and what was most transformational. And I know that it's been similar for a lot of people, so perhaps that will help. But really what it came down to, and I learned this from Eckhart Tolle and a variety of teachers that preach similar messaging, is that, we spend a lot of time thinking, right, about all kinds of things, whether you're thinking about the past or you're thinking about the future, or you're just too much in your head. Well, not you, we're too much in our head, right? And really being able to get out of our heads and just be present and just experience what's happening right now. I mean, they say that that's technically enlightenment, and then if you can sustain that, then you're officially enlightened, so to speak. But it's about, so the moment for me was when it was pointed out that you don't have to take your thoughts so seriously, or your emotions, right? And we are not just thoughts and emotions. We are the witnessing presence in which thought and emotion arise, right? And just like how we have thousands of thoughts a day that will pop into our head and leave immediately because we don't give it any attention, because for whatever reason it's meaningless in that moment, or it's a crazy thought and you're like, that was weird, and you just move on. But then you'll have another thought and an emotion will come with it and you'll get stuck there, right? And it will lead to like a whole train of things that you're projecting just in your head, right? And it's not that they're not real, it's just that they're not relevant to this moment, right? They're worries about what you're going to have to do later or tomorrow or next week, or things that might happen, or other people that are doing things that might impact you. Or it could be, feeling depressed about the past because you wish you would have done things differently, or all these kinds of things that, we don't have to listen to those thoughts. And it's not about suppressing them, because that doesn't work. That just makes it worse. It's really just about allowing them to be and then letting them go and coming back to whatever's happening just right here in this moment, right? And not getting carried away with it. And it's not an easy thing to do, because most of us have lived our whole lives not doing that, right?
Absolutely.
We've lived our whole lives. And I mean, it's taught to us, not maliciously, that's just sort of how most people operate. But, the whole focus is on your mental world of like how much you know and what you can do and how many problems can you solve, and how do you deal with the emotions that come along in life and manage your relationships. And it's very much like this mental world that we live in, and that's okay. That's just how the universe sort of evolved to this point. It's how it is. But we can take that and start to really just take a step back and be like, okay, well, I'm not getting rid of my mind, but I don't have to listen to it right now. And I can just be here and feel the peace,
Excellent. We're running near the end of our time. Very, very quick one.
Oh.
Based on your experience and of interviewing a wide range of guests, just in a nutshell, what's the secrets for a well-balanced and happy life? In a nutshell, quick one.
In a nutshell, yeah, I mean, do just like I would say it comes down to like following your heart, right, or your intuition, and whatever that means for you, and being like believing in yourself at that level, and trusting that you are here for. I mean, I believe that we have a purpose, and that our intuition, or whatever you want to call it, your heart, it guides us in the right direction.
Right.
And even if it feels contradictory to what other people or a society at large is telling you should be doing to live a happy life, if you just follow what calls you from within, right, then that's the best you can do, and it will be plenty.
Absolutely.
And it will take you where you need to go, even if it's scary, right? It's not like it'll be easy necessarily, but as I'm sure many people will attest, like when you listen to yourself, like that's when the best things happen. Right?
Absolutely. No, you're exactly right, in my experience too. Thank you, Shane. Back to Kathleen to wrap it up for us.
How do people contact you? How do they get to be on your show?
Sure. So if people want to check it out, it's called Underground Antics. It's available on all podcast streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that. Or you can go to undergroundantics.com and you can contact me there. Otherwise, you can also find me on Facebook or Instagram or any of the social medias. It's just Shane Pokroy, which is ShanePokroy. And check it out. Always happy to have people reach out. And thank you very much for having me on today. It's been a blast. I've really enjoyed it.
Hey, it's pleasure. Very good. Thank you. And for me, the touch of nostalgia, hearing that accent and talking a little bit of the same language. So I appreciate that as well. I'm not knocking Canada. I love Canada, but it's good to have that connection with the old country. So thank you, Shane.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you also very much for tuning into our show. And once again, we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And anyone out there interested in being a guest on our show, please don't hesitate to reach out to Peter or myself. So until next time, everyone, goodbye.
Goodbye.